My name is Fiona Slater, and I was 34 the night my fiancé's family tried to buy my silence for the price of my own name. It happened at the rehearsal dinner in a country club dining room with 60 guests watching, when my future mother-in-law slid a folded document across the white tablecloth and said, loud enough for the back tables to hear, that I should sign it because I was a gold digger who brought nothing to this family. I read every line of it. I picked up the pen. And they all leaned in, certain they knew exactly how this ended. They thought the folder sitting in front of me was empty. What I did next, with that pen already in my hand, and why my father-in-law at the far end of the table nearly came out of his chair, is the part none of them ever saw coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the quietest woman at the table is usually the one holding the whole thing up. If a story about being underestimated by the people who owed you the most has ever kept you up at night, you are among friends here. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Because to understand that pen, you have to go back to a truck, a pair of gloves, and everything I taught myself to hide. I own a company called Slater Grounds, commercial landscaping and snow removal, the kind of work nobody photographs. 12 years ago, it was one used truck, a second-hand mower, and me answering the phone in a parking lot. Now it is 40 trucks, 90 employees, and contracts across 3 counties. Hospitals, corporate campuses, the interstate medians, the state pays us to keep clear. When it snows at 2 in the morning, my crews are the reason people get to work. That business made me a wealthy woman, though you would never guess it to look at me. I drive a 2009 pickup with a dented tailgate. I wear the same flannel shirts I wore when I was 22 and broke. My hands are rough because I still get out and pull weeds when a job runs behind. Money, for me, has always been something you build and then keep quiet about. I learned that young, and I learned it the hard way. Every time someone in my life found out what I had, something changed in their face. The math started, the asking followed. Friends turned into people with a proposal. A boyfriend once told me I made him feel small, then made sure I felt smaller. So I got good at looking like I had nothing. I paid for things without flinching and let people assume the flinch was there. I told myself it was humility. Really, it was armor. I had learned that the fastest way to lose people was to let them see how much you had. And for most of my life, that armor worked exactly the way I wanted it to. Then I met a man who never once asked me what I earned. The armor started with my grandmother. She raised me after my parents stopped being able to. She cleaned other people's houses for 30 years and never once acted like it made her less than the people whose floors she scrubbed. She had a pair of leather work gloves, cracked and soft from use, that she wore for everything. The garden, the gutters, the old lawnmower she kept running long past its time. When I was small and complained that we did not have what other families had, she would hold up those gloves and tell me something I did not understand until much later. Worth isn't inherited, she said. It's built. You make it with these, and nobody can take it back across the table. She died when I was 19, and she left me almost nothing anyone could deposit. She left me the gloves. I started the company 3 years after her funeral, with those gloves in the truck's glove box, and I have carried them to every important day of my life since. They were in my pocket the day I signed my first 6-figure contract. They were in my pocket the day I paid off the last loan. They smell like her still, if I press them to my face, which I do more often than I would admit to anyone. I built everything I have with my own 2 hands because the woman who raised me showed me how. That is the part the Ashfords could never have known, sitting in their club with their name on the library wall. They thought a person's value came stamped on them at birth. My grandmother taught me it came off your hands. I met Ethan Ashford in a parking lot at 6 in the morning, in 8 inches of fresh snow. He taught history at the high school my company plowed, and he had come out early to help shovel the walkways before the buses arrived, which no teacher was paid to do. I found him doing it wrong, hurting his back, and I showed him the right way to throw snow so it does not come back on you. We talked for 20 minutes while my crew finished the lot. He did not ask what I did for a living exactly. He asked what I liked to read. When I told him, he lit up and named a book I loved, And we stood there in the cold, arguing about the ending until his fingers went white. He was gentle in a way I was not used to. He wore a coat that had been mended at the elbow and did not seem to care. He looked at me like I was interesting, not like I was a set of numbers he was trying to add up. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel like I had to shrink. I did not feel the armor click into place. I gave him my number, which I almost never did, and I told myself it was because he taught history and had kind eyes. Really, it was because he had spent 20 minutes with me and never once asked the question that always ruined it. He never asked me what I was worth. 2 years later, I understood why. In his world, they only asked that question about people they had already decided to reject. I knew the name Ashford before I knew Ethan. Everyone in the county did. It was carved over the entrance to the town library, and it hung under the oldest portraits in the Historical Society, men in high collars who had owned the mill before the mill closed. The Ashfords were what people in that town meant when they said old family. Not rich, exactly, in any way you could see, but placed, seated. The kind of name that got you a table without a reservation and a nod from people who did not nod. Ethan carried it like a coat that did not quite fit. He had left the family orbit on purpose, taken the teaching job his mother found beneath them, and built a small life that was entirely his own. When he was with me, he seemed lighter, like a man who had set something heavy down. "It's why I love you," he told me once, early on. "You have no idea who my family is, and you would not care if you did." I laughed and said he was right. I did not care about the portraits or the library wall. But I noticed, even then, how carefully he said my family, the way you might name a weather system moving toward the coast. I asked him once what it had been like, growing up inside that name. He got quiet. Then he said something I filed away and did not understand for a long time. "There is nothing more expensive," he said, "than a family that has run out of everything but its name." I thought it was a poet's line. I did not know yet it was a warning, or that I was about to walk straight into the middle of it. The first dinner was at the family lake house, a big shingled place that had clearly been grand once and was tired now in ways I noticed and pretended not to. Margaret Ashford met me at the door in pearls and a smile that could have cut glass. She held my hand a second too long, looked at my clean but unremarkable coat, and asked warmly who I did the gardening for. I said I worked in landscaping. She said, "You mean you work in landscaping?" as if correcting a child's grammar, and the smile never moved. At dinner, Ethan's sister Vivian leaned in with the interest of a woman conducting a survey. "And what does your family do?" she asked. "Are they local?" I said, "My grandmother raised me and she had passed." "Oh," Vivian said, and let the silence do the rest. They were kind the way a closed door is polished. Every question had a floor under it, and the floor was always the same. "Where do you come from? And is it anywhere?" I sat there with a company that plowed half the county under my own name, and I said none of it. I let them think the truck in the driveway was all there was. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table like he was proud of how well I was taking it. I told myself I was being gracious. The truth is uglier and older than that. I was doing the thing I always did. I was making myself smaller, so they would not have a reason to send me away. I was auditioning, and I did not even know the part was already cast. Here is the thing I have to make you understand, because otherwise, none of what I let happen makes sense. I did not want the Ashfords' money. There was no money to want, though I did not know that yet. What I wanted was the table. I wanted to belong somewhere that had been standing before me and would go on standing after. I grew up with a grandmother and a rented duplex and no cousins at holidays, no big loud family that argued about football and passed dishes. I built a company because I was good at building things out of nothing, but you cannot build a family out of nothing. You have to be let in. So when Ethan took me back to that snowy parking lot on our anniversary and got down on one knee with a plain gold ring he had saved 3 months of a teacher's salary to buy, I did not think about his mother. I thought about a place to belong. I said yes before he finished asking. I said yes to him, And in my heart, I thought I was also saying yes to them, to the portraits and the library wall and Sunday dinners for the rest of my life. That was the wound talking, though I could not hear it then. A woman who has always been outside a door will do almost anything to be waved inside. Even shrink, even hide. Even sit quietly while people who owe her nothing decide, over cocktails, whether she is worthy of a chair. I said yes, and I drove home that night happier than I had been in years. I had no idea I had just handed them the one thing they knew how to use against me. Margaret asked to see the ring the way a jeweler asks to see a flaw. She turned my hand toward the window light, studied the modest gold band, and said, "How practical," in a tone that made practical the worst word in the language. Then she got to work. Within a week, she had appointed herself the planner of a wedding I had not asked her to plan. It would be at the club, of course. The Ashfords had always married at the club. The guest list would be handled by her, because there were people who had to be invited. People whose grandfathers had known Ethan's grandfather. When I mentioned I would like to invite my crew, the men and women who had built my life with me, she smiled and said, "We would see about space." Everything I wanted was a thing we would see about. Everything they wanted was already decided. I watched a wedding that was supposed to be mine turn into a performance of a family I was allowed to attend, but not to alter. And I let it, because pushing back felt like giving them a reason. If you have ever sat at a table where your welcome came with a list of conditions, you already know the sound of that particular silence. The one where you swallow the thing you meant to say. Stay with me here, because that silence is about to get very, very loud. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because the algorithm hides these stories from the exact people who need to hear them. I told myself I could earn my way in if I was patient enough. I was about to learn the door had a different purpose than I thought. What followed were the tests. Nobody called them that, but that is what they were. Small, constant, deniable. At the next dinner, Margaret watched which fork I reached for and corrected me with her eyes before I touched the wrong one. When I mentioned a movie I loved, Vivian said, "Oh, that's fun," in the voice you use for a child's drawing. When I spoke, Margaret would wait a beat and then repeat what I had said in slightly better English, as if translating me for the room. I have negotiated contracts with men who tried to bury me in fine print, and I have never felt as managed as I did at that table. Each little correction carried the same message underneath, patient and total. You are not one of us. You can visit. You cannot stay. And the cruelty of it was that none of it was loud enough to name. If I had said, "Your mother keeps insulting me," Ethan could have honestly said, "She was just talking about forks." That was the design. Death by 1,000 forks. I started dreading the drive to the lake house. I started rehearsing sentences in the truck, trying to sound like a person they would not need to correct. I, who had never rehearsed a thing in my life, who once told a county commissioner exactly where he could put his lowball offer, sat in my own truck practicing how to be smaller. I did not see it happening. That is how it works. It does not feel like disappearing. It feels like manners. It feels like love, even, like the price you pay to be let in. And every dinner, without knowing it, I paid a little more of myself across that table. I finally said something to Ethan on the drive back one night. Not an accusation, just a small, careful truth. "Your mother doesn't like me," I said. He sighed, the tired sigh of a man who had been managing this weather his whole life. "She's like that with everyone," he said. "Give her time, she'll warm up. Just don't give her anything to hold on to." I asked him what that meant. "Don't give her anything to hold on to." He said, "You know, don't make waves. Let her run the wedding. It's easier." I looked out the window at the dark trees going by and felt something I did not have a name for yet. I had wanted him to say, "She is wrong about you, and I will make her stop." Instead, he asked me to be quieter, to fit into a smaller space, to hand his mother the wheel so the ride would be smooth. And the terrible part is that I understood. He had spent 36 years learning that the way to survive Margaret Ashford was to give her no edges to grip. He was not betraying me. He was teaching me to do what he did. But I did not want to survive her. I wanted him to stand in front of me. He kept asking me to be smaller, and I kept getting smaller. And I told myself it was love. That night, I lay awake and finally let the thought finish itself. The man I was going to marry had never once, in 2 years, stood between me and his family. He loved me in every quiet way there was. He just could not seem to do it out loud. And I was starting to wonder what would happen the day quiet was not enough. Vivian invited me to coffee, just us girls, to get to know each other before the wedding. I should have known better. She arrived with a leather folder and a smile, and spent the first 10 minutes being warmer than she had ever been. Then the questions started, and they were not the questions of a woman getting to know a sister. Where did I live exactly? Did I own or rent? Ethan mentioned you have a truck. Is that, what, for the business? How many people work for you roughly? Is it just seasonal? She was mapping me. Every answer went into that folder behind her eyes, and I could see her doing the arithmetic. The same arithmetic I had spent my whole life dodging. But it was running backward from what I expected. She was not trying to find out how much I had. She was trying to confirm how little. She wanted to establish, on the record, that I was a woman with a truck and a seasonal job and no family and no money, a woman who could only be marrying Ethan for one reason. I gave her small, true, incomplete answers and watched her decide I was exactly what she had come to prove. Yes, I said. Just a truck. Just a small operation. I let her write the story she wanted. I do not fully know why. Part of it was the old armor, the reflex to look like less. Part of it was something colder and newer, a sense that I was being investigated, and that whatever they were building, I did not yet want them to know what I actually was. I drove home certain of one thing. That coffee had not been a welcome. It had been discovery. And discovery is what you do before a trial. I heard the word for the first time through a door I was not supposed to be behind. It was another dinner, and I had gone looking for a bathroom in a hallway I did not know, and I heard Margaret's voice from the study, low and certain, the way she never sounded in front of guests. We need to protect the family, she was saying. Vivian's voice answered, something I could not catch. Then Margaret again, clear as a bell. She's clearly after what's left. A gold digger, plain as that. Some women see a name and they smell an opportunity. I stood in that dark hallway with my hand on the wall and did not move. Gold digger. The word sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. I had spent my whole life so afraid of being wanted for my money that I had hidden it from the world, and here was a woman deciding I was a thief for money I had never touched and did not need. But it was 3 other words that kept me standing there in the dark. After what's left. What's left. You do not say what's left about a full account. You say it about a draining one. You say it about the bottom of something. I turned it over and over, that strange, revealing little phrase, and for the first time since I had met the Ashfords, I felt the ground shift under the story I had been told about them. They had a name on a library wall, and portraits in the Historical Society, and a lake house going tired at the seams. And somewhere in that study, the matriarch of it all was guarding what's left. I went back to the table. I smiled, and I started, very quietly, to pay attention. I did not get angry. Anger is loud, and loud is what they wanted. Instead, the next morning, I did what any business owner with a functioning brain does when she hears the word thief said about her by the family she is marrying into. I called my attorney, not to attack anyone, to protect what I had built. I told her I was getting married, and I told her what I was hearing, and she said the thing lawyers say that sounds cold until you have needed it. Fiona, she said, you have a company worth 8 figures and no protection at all. We fixed that before the wedding, not after. So we started. We kept my business assets clearly separate. We drafted a prenuptial agreement of my own, one that protected Slater grounds, my properties, and my investments. The things I had made with my grandmother's gloves in the glove box, from anyone who might one day decide they were family property. I have watched too many women hand over everything they built just to keep the peace, and I decided I was not going to be one of them. If you have ever been there, if you have ever been made to feel greedy for wanting to keep what was yours, tell me in the comments and hit subscribe, because what I did with that document later is the whole reason I am telling you this. I signed nothing that day. I just made sure that whatever the Ashfords were planning, I would not walk into it with empty hands. I put the folder in a drawer and tried to forget it was there. I told myself I was being careful, not suspicious. I did not yet know I would need it. I did not yet know they were about to hand me a reason. I found out what's left meant on a Saturday at the lake house, looking for a powder room and opening the wrong door. It was the study, Margaret's private room, and I stepped in before I realized where I was. The first thing I saw was the wall. There was a rectangle on it, a clean, bright rectangle in the middle of faded paneling, the exact shape and size of a large painting that was no longer there. I knew that shape. It is the ghost a picture leaves when it has hung somewhere for decades, and then, suddenly, has not. Around the room there were more of them, pale wounds where things used to be. A cabinet stood open and half empty. And on the desk, not hidden, just sitting there the way things sit in a house where no guest is ever supposed to wander, was a short stack of mail. The top envelope had a bank's logo and a red stamp across it that I could read from the doorway. Past due. Under it, the corner of a glossy sheet, the kind auction houses send. Estate items, it said, for appraisal. I stood very still with my hand in my coat pocket, and without deciding to, I closed my fingers around my grandmother's gloves, the way I do when the ground is not steady. And the whole story turned over in my hands like a coin. They had not looked down on me because I had nothing. They had looked down on me because I had something. Something real and growing and mine, and they were quietly, desperately running out. The portraits and the pearls and the name on the library wall were a beautiful front on an empty house. Margaret was not protecting a fortune from a gold digger. She was hiding the absence of one, and she needed a thief in the room so no one would look too closely at the vault. I backed out of that study and pulled the door shut and stood in the hall holding those gloves. And for the first time in 2 years, I was not afraid of them. After that door, every insult I had swallowed changed flavor in my mouth. The correction of my forks, the survey over coffee. How practical. About my ring. It had never been about protecting a legacy. There was no legacy left to protect. It was about controlling the story in the room, keeping everyone's eyes on the poor, unsuitable woman Ethan had dragged home so that nobody would count the empty spaces on the walls. And the strangest thing happened as I understood it. I stopped hating Margaret and started, against my will, to see her. Later that same visit, I passed the study again and the door was cracked, and she was in there alone. She had taken down one of the empty frames and was polishing it, the glass over nothing, her hands moving in small, careful circles, and her hands were shaking. She did not know I saw. She would have died before she let me see. I understood, watching her, that 40 years ago she had walked into this family the same way I had, from somewhere with less, and they had measured her at the door too, and she had spent 4 decades learning to be a wall so smooth nobody could ever grip her the way they had once gripped her. She was not the author of the cruelty. She was its longest-serving employee. She was terrified. Of the red stamps? Of the empty frames? Of a town that still nodded at the name and would stop the day it learned the truth. I felt something I had not planned to feel. Not forgiveness, just recognition. She and I were more alike than either of us would ever admit. The difference was only this. She had a name and no money. I had money and no name. And one of us still believed that made me the one who brought nothing. You would think, knowing what I knew, that I would have left. That I would have looked at the empty frames and the shaking hands and the word gold digger and walked out with my company and my dignity intact. I did not, because I still loved Ethan, really loved him, The gentle man from the parking lot who argued about books until his fingers went white. And because I still wanted the table. Even a table in a broke and frightened house, I still wanted a place at it. That is the part I am least proud of and most honest about. Knowing they had nothing did not cure me of wanting them. It just changed what I was afraid of. I decided I would not use what I knew. I would not walk into a dinner and announce that I had seen the past due notices, that I knew the vault was empty, that the whole grand performance was held together with pearls and nerve. That would have been cruelty for cruelty, their game played back at them, and it would have won me nothing I actually wanted. I did not want to defeat Margaret. God help me, I still wanted her to like me. So I kept the secret, and I kept my folder in its drawer, and I kept showing up, smaller each time, hoping that if I was patient and good and quiet enough, the door would finally open on its own. I still thought I could earn my way in. I still thought welcome was a thing you could deserve into being. I was about to find out that the door had never been closed to keep me out. It had been closed so they could choose the moment to open it, and make sure everyone was watching when they did. The ultimatum arrived dressed as a formality. Ethan told me 3 weeks before the wedding, looking at his shoes. "Mom thinks we should have a prenup," he said, "just to make everyone comfortable. She's having Vivian's lawyer draw something up." I asked to see it, and when it came, I read it twice to be sure I understood what I was holding. It was not a prenup in any fair sense of the word. It was a surrender. In the event of divorce, I would leave with nothing. Worse than nothing. The document defined everything I brought into the marriage as family property, held in trust by the Ashfords. My business, my properties, the things I had built with my own 2 hands before I had ever heard the name Ashford. They wanted me to sign my life's work over to a family that was hiding red-stamped envelopes in a study. And the beautiful, insane logic of it was this. They still thought I was poor. They thought Slater Grounds was a truck and a seasonal job. This whole crushing document was designed to protect their non-existent fortune from my non-existent one. They were reaching across the table to take assets they did not believe existed, from a woman they had decided was after theirs. It would have been funny if it were not aimed at the one thing in the world that was truly mine. I sat with that document a long time. I did not call my lawyer, not yet. I wanted to see how far they would take it. I wanted to see if the man I loved would take it there with them. I put their prenup in the same drawer as mine, 2 folders side by side, and I waited for the Ashfords to show me exactly who they were. I gave Ethan the chance to be the man I hoped he was. I laid their document on our kitchen table, flat, where he could not pretend not to see it, and I asked him one question. "Do you know what this says?" He read it. I watched his face, waiting for the anger, the flush. The moment he crumpled it in his fist and said, "Absolutely not. You are not signing this. That is not what happened." He read it, and he got quiet. And then he said the words that ended something between us that I am not sure ever fully came back. "Just sign it," he said. "It's only paper. You and I both know we'll never get divorced, so it doesn't matter what it says. Sign it and make her comfortable, and then we can just be happy." I looked at the man I loved across my own kitchen table and understood that he was asking me to sign my grandmother's gloves away to make his mother comfortable. To hand over everything I had built, on paper, so that a woman who called me a thief could feel that she had won. "It's only paper," he said, the way people say things when they have never had to build anything and so cannot imagine losing it. It was not only paper to me. It was every early morning in the snow. It was my grandmother's hands, and the man who was supposed to stand in front of me had just asked me to lie down. I kept my voice level and my hands still. I told him I would think about it, and that night I understood, finally and completely, the thing I had been running from my whole life. Nobody was ever going to hand me a place at the table, not even him. That night I could not sleep, and so I did the thing I never let myself do. I looked straight at my own life. I saw a girl in a rented duplex, learning that the way to keep people was to need them and never to threaten them. I saw a young woman hiding her first real money like a shameful thing. I saw myself paying for dinners and letting the flinch show, dressing down, driving a dented truck on purpose, telling every person I loved a version of myself that was smaller than the truth so they would not leave. And I saw where it had brought me. To a kitchen table at 34, being asked to sign away the one thing I had never made smaller, my company, in order to keep a family that had never once chosen me. The armor had not protected me. The armor was the wound. I had spent my whole life making myself small enough to be loved, and the smaller I made myself, the less there was of me for anyone to actually love, so I made myself smaller still, feeding the thing I was starving from. I had done it with friends. I had done it with the boyfriend who told me I made him feel small, and now I was doing it with the Ashfords, sanding myself down to fit a chair at a table in an empty house. My grandmother did not raise me to be small. She raised me to build. She wore those gloves like a crown. And somewhere along the way, I had taken everything she gave me and hidden it in a glove box, ashamed, as if worth were something to apologize for. I lay there in the dark, and for the first time in a very long time, I stopped apologizing. In the morning, I called my attorney, and this time it was different. Last time, I had been protecting myself out of fear. This time, I was doing something quieter and harder to name. I asked her to prepare a full financial disclosure. Everything, the real numbers, the company valuation, the properties, the investment accounts, all of it laid out plainly on paper for anyone who cared to read. And I asked her to finalize my own prenuptial agreement, the one that protected what I had built, and to add one plain page of legal fact at the front. She asked me what I was planning to do with it. I told her the truth, which was that I did not know yet. I only knew that I was tired of being the poor woman in a story other people were writing. If there was going to be a document on a table, it was not going to be only theirs. My lawyer walked me through the law, calm and precise, and I wrote it all down. A prenuptial agreement pushed on someone under pressure, without their own attorney, without full and honest disclosure of both sides' assets, is not worth the paper it is printed on. It can be thrown out. It protects no one. She told me that a fair prenup requires both people to show their real numbers, in the open, with time to think and counsel to advise. Their document did none of that. It was a piece of theater, and bad theater at that. I put my folder together, the disclosure, my agreement, the one page of law, and I set it by the door. I did not know if I would open it. I only knew I would not walk in without it. Vivian let it slip, the way people let things slip when they want you to know and cannot admit they want you to know. We were confirming numbers for the rehearsal dinner, and she mentioned, lightly, that it would be a full room. 60 people, she said. All the important ones. Everyone will be there to witness you joining the family. She smiled when she said it, and the smile had teeth. I went home and sat with that sentence. Witness you joining the family. 60 people. The important ones, and I understood what the rehearsal dinner was going to be. It was not a dinner. It was a stage. They were going to hand me their document in front of 60 of the oldest names in the county, at the exact moment when refusing would look like the tantrum of an ungrateful gold digger. They had chosen the audience on purpose. A woman alone at a kitchen table can say no. A woman surrounded by 60 watching faces, in a white dress rehearsal, one day before her wedding, with the man she loves looking at her hopefully. That woman is supposed to be too ashamed to refuse. Public was their weapon. Shame was the pen they meant to put in my hand. And sitting there, I realized something that surprised me. Public could work the other way too. If they wanted 60 witnesses, they were going to get 60 witnesses, but not to what they had planned. I did not decide to humiliate them. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to how this ends. I decided only that whatever happened in that room, it was going to happen in the light. And I was going to be, for the first time in my life, exactly my full size. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I sat alone at my kitchen table with two things in front of me, my grandmother's gloves and the folder by the door. I did not rehearse a speech. For once in my life, I did not practice being anyone. I just sat with the quiet and asked myself what I actually wanted, underneath the wanting to belong, underneath the 2 years of shrinking. And the answer, when it came, was simple, and it cost me something to say, even to an empty room. I wanted to be able to look at myself. That was all. Not to win, not to destroy them, not even, anymore, to be let in. I wanted to walk out of tomorrow, able to face the woman who had built 40 trucks out of one, the woman my grandmother had raised. Everything I had done for 2 years had been a slow trade of that woman for a chair. And I was done trading. I picked up the gloves and held them to my face, and breathed in the leather and the memory, and I made myself a promise in her voice. Whatever happens tomorrow, I will not walk into that room as anyone smaller than I am. I did not know yet if I would marry Ethan. That is the honest truth. I loved him, and I did not know. I did not know if a man who could ask me to sign away my life to soothe his mother could ever learn to stand in front of me instead of beside me while I bled. But I knew one thing with total clarity, sitting there in the dark with the gloves against my cheek. I was done auditioning. The part had never been mine to earn, and I was finally, after 34 years, going to stop trying. The club was beautiful in the way a stage set is beautiful, if you know where to look. I looked. The flowers on the tables were silk, not fresh, dressed up under the lights so most people would not notice. There were half as many staff as a room that size should have. The chandeliers had been dimmed to a flattering gold that also, conveniently, softened the worn spots on the carpet and the water stain near the ceiling. 60 of the oldest names in the county sat at round tables in their good jewelry, and every one of them believed they were dining in old money's house. I knew better now. I knew the whole room was held up with nerve and silk flowers and a name on a library wall. Margaret worked the room like the performance of her life, radiant, gracious, touching elbows, calling people darling. Vivian orbited her. And at the far end of the head table sat Gerald Ashford, Ethan's father, a quiet man I had barely heard speak in 2 years. He was watching me, not the way the others watched me, with the polite arithmetic. He was watching me the way you watch weather you are not sure about, and when our eyes met, he did not look away. And something in his face was almost like an apology. He did not have the courage to make out loud. I took my seat. I set my small clutch in my lap, and inside my coat, folded flat, was my folder. Their document was already on the table, tucked under Margaret's place setting where she thought I could not see it, waiting for its moment. The gloves were in my pocket. 60 people lifted their glasses. And I understood that the dinner had already begun, and that everyone in the room was about to get exactly what they came for. Just not the way they expected. It happened between the salad and the toast. Margaret stood, tapped her glass with a spoon, and the room went soft and attentive the way rooms do for a woman like her. She thanked everyone for coming. She said a few gracious words about family, about legacy, about the importance of protecting what generations had built. And then, still smiling, still radiant, she reached under her place setting and drew out the document, and she slid it across the white tablecloth until it came to rest directly in front of me. "There is just one small family matter to attend to first," she said, and her voice carried to the back tables the way she had trained it to for 40 years. "Fiona, dear, before you join this family, we need you to sign this." She let a pause open, and into that pause, so that not one of the 60 could miss it, she said the thing she had been wanting to say to me for 2 years. "Sign it, gold digger. You bring nothing to this family." The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It held still. 60 of the oldest names in the county sat with their forks halfway up and their eyes on me, and I could feel the verdict already forming on their faces, the old, easy verdict about the woman with the truck and no family who had reached too high. Ethan had gone white beside me. Vivian was watching with the small, hungry stillness of someone who has waited a long time for a show. And Margaret stood over me, gracious and merciless, holding out a pen. I looked at the document in front of me on the tablecloth. Then I looked up at her, and I did the one thing she was not prepared for. I smiled, and I picked up the pen. I did not sign. I read, out loud. Calmly, into the silence of that room, I began to read their document to the 60 witnesses they had so thoughtfully assembled. In the event of dissolution of the marriage, I read, the party of the second part shall relinquish all claim to assets, and shall convey any and all property, business interests, and holdings brought into the marriage to the Ashford Family Trust. I paused and looked up. That's me, I said. The party of the second part. Everything I bring, signed over to your family, forever. Is that right, Margaret? Her smile flickered just slightly because this was not the script. In her script, I was supposed to be crying by now, or fleeing, or scrawling my name in shame. Instead, I was reading her own weapon back to her, slowly, so everyone could hear exactly what the gracious Ashfords were asking of the woman they had called nothing. I kept the pen in my hand. I let them all watch me hold it over the signature line, and I felt the whole room lean in, 60 people certain they were about to watch a gold digger sign her surrender. Ethan whispered my name, half a plea, half a warning. Margaret's chin lifted in something like triumph, and Gerald, at the end of the table, set down his glass very carefully, as if he had seen something the rest of them had not. I let the moment stretch until it was almost unbearable, the pen poised, the room holding its breath. It's a generous document, I said quietly. It really does account for everything I'm bringing to this family. Then I set the pen down on the tablecloth, next to their document, and I did not sign it. And into that confused, breathing silence, I reached into my coat, and I took out a plain manila folder, and I laid it on the table in front of me. There's just one thing it's missing, I said. I opened my folder the way you open a door you have kept locked for a long time, without hurry, because there is no longer any reason to rush. I took out the first page and I laid it face up on the tablecloth where the light could reach it. It missing, I said, the other party's disclosure. A fair agreement shows both people's numbers. So let me show you mine. I began to read, still calm, still quiet, and the numbers filled the room like water filling a low place. Slater Grounds, I read. Commercial landscaping and snow removal. 40 vehicles, 90 employees, contracts in 3 counties. And then I read the valuation of my company, and I heard, somewhere behind me, a fork touch a plate and stop. I read the properties I owned outright. I read the investment accounts. I laid each page down as I went, face up. A plain paper trail of a life built by hand, and with every page the arithmetic in that room ran backward and then broke. These were not the numbers of a gold digger with a truck. They were the numbers of a woman who could have bought the club, the lake house, and the name on the library wall, and had money left for salt. You said I bring nothing to this family, I said, and I looked up at Margaret, whose face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Let's read what nothing looks like. And at the end of the head table, Gerald Ashford, the quiet man who was the only person in that entire room who actually knew what the family accounts held, put both hands flat on the table and half rose out of his chair, staring at my pages, because he understood before anyone else in that room what those numbers meant. He understood that the woman his wife had just called nothing was the only solvent person at the table. He understood which family, in this marriage, had been marrying up. He rose and he caught himself, and he sat back down slowly, and he did not take his eyes off me. Here is where they thought it ended. They thought I would slide my own document across the table now, the way they had slid theirs, and crush them with it in front of 60 witnesses. Take the empty house and the red-stamped envelopes and the shaking hands and hold them up to the light. It would have been easy. It would have been fair, even. And it would have made me exactly what they said I was. Someone who came to that table to take. So I did not do it. I took out the last page of my folder, my own prenuptial agreement, the one that protected everything I had built, and I did not read it to the room. I simply laid it down and said, quietly, I brought a document too. Mine protects what I made from anyone who ever decides it's theirs. I was going to sign it and marry into this family anyway, because I wanted to belong here more than I wanted to be safe. And then I stood up. I stood up in front of 60 of the oldest names in the county at my own rehearsal dinner, and I set the pen down for good. I'm not going to sign yours, I said to Margaret, and I'm not going to marry your family. I never was. And then I turned to Ethan, and I said the truest thing I had ever said out loud. I'll marry you. At the courthouse, Tuesday, with nothing changing hands but a promise, and no one's name on it but ours. Or I'll wish you a good life and go build mine. But I am done earning a seat at a table that put a price on me. Choose now, Ethan. Not for her. For you. The room was utterly silent. I had just given up the wedding I had dreamed of, the family I had shrunk myself for 2 years to join, and quite possibly the man I loved, all in one breath, standing up. And I want you to understand something. For the first time in my entire life, standing there having lost all of it, I felt exactly my full size. Ethan stood up. For a long moment he looked at his mother, and then he looked at me, and I watched 36 years of learning to be smooth war with something braver underneath. Then he did a thing I had never once seen him do. He walked around the table, past his mother's outstretched hand, and he came and stood beside me, and he took my hand in front of everyone. Then he turned to Margaret and said, in a voice that shook and held anyway, "You just showed me exactly who values what in this family." And Margaret, who had run that room like a stage her whole life, finally lost the performance. Her composure cracked, and the truth came out of her in a hiss meant only for me, but loud enough for the front tables to hear. "You have no idea," she said, "what it costs to keep this family's name." And for just a second, I did feel it. The 40 years, the empty frames, the shaking hands. A woman who had been measured at a door once too, and had never stopped bleeding from it. I did not hate her, but I did not sit back down either. Gerald caught my eye from the end of the table, and he gave me the smallest nod, a quiet man's apology and blessing at once. I picked up my folder and my gloves, and I walked out of that beautiful, dimly lit, silk-flowered room with my hand in Ethan's, my full size, at last. We married on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I wore a simple dress, and my grandmother's gloves folded in my pocket. Ethan wore his good coat, the one with the mended elbow. 2 of my crew stood as witnesses, the men who had built my life alongside me, the ones Margaret would have seen about space for. There were no silk flowers and no 60 faces doing arithmetic. There was just a clerk, and a promise, and nothing changing hands but that. Gerald came. He stood at the back of the little room, alone, the way he had watched me across the head table, and afterward he took my hand in both of his rough old ones and held it a moment. "We were the ones marrying up," he said, so quietly only I could hear. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. Margaret did not come. I did not expect her to, and I found, standing in that plain, bright room, that I did not need her to. The table I had spent 2 years trying to earn my way into had turned out to be a stage in an empty house, and I had walked off it, finally, into a marriage that had my full size in it and room to spare. It was the smallest wedding in the history of the Ashford name. It was the first honest one. The lake house sold that autumn. The name stayed, carved over the library the way it always had been, but the town learned soon enough what had been hiding behind it, the way towns do. I did not lift a finger to save the Ashfords, and I did not lift a finger to sink them either. I let them keep their name and their debt and their empty frames, and I stayed out of it, because their story was no longer mine to write. Slater Grounds took on 2 more counties that year. Ethan kept teaching history, and learned slowly how to stand in front of me instead of beside me while I bled. We bought a house with money I had made with my own hands, and we put both our names on it, separate and clear and honest, everything in the open the way a fair agreement is supposed to be. He never once asked me to be smaller again, and I never once, in that house, had to pretend I was less than exactly what my grandmother raised me to be. I hung my grandmother's gloves on the wall of my new office, framed, in the spot where the light hits them first in the morning. Not hidden in a glove box anymore. Not shameful. Not small. Right out in the open where anyone who comes to talk business can see them. Cracked and soft, and worth more to me than every painting that ever hung in the Ashford study. Sometimes, early, before the crews roll out, I stand and look at them, and I think about the empty rectangle on Margaret's wall, the ghost of a thing she sold to keep a name. And I think about the thing I hung up in its place. She spent her life defending a wall with nothing behind it. I spent mine ashamed of everything I had built. In the end, only one of us learned to put her worth where the light could reach it. Here is the only lesson I took from all of it, and I give it to you plainly. Worth isn't something you inherit at a table someone else sets. It's something you build with your own two hands, and no one, no matter whose name is carved over the library, gets to slide it back across the tablecloth and call it nothing. That's my story. A folder I almost never opened, a pen I picked up, then put down, and a name I finally stopped trying to earn. If anyone ever made you feel like you brought nothing to the table, go count what you built with your own two hands and count it out loud. Do it today. And if this story reached you, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.